I never imagined that a toxic friend could control my relationship and almost ruin me. I remember exactly the day it all clicked. It wasn't with a scream, a fight, or anything cinematic. It was in silence, sitting on the living room couch, watching Sabrina cry over a message Raphael had sent. I looked at her and felt a mixture of anger and pity. Anger, because I knew he was doing it on purpose, poking at her wounds just to maintain control. Pity, because she truly believed she owed him an apology, even though she hadn't done anything. That day I felt like I was living in a strange triangle, where her friendship with him was greater than our relationship. I felt small, tired, and for the first time thought, I'm losing myself in this story. I wasn't a jealous guy, never was. But over time, Raphael began to occupy spaces that weren't his. He gave his opinion on everything, even the color of the walls in the house. He felt like he was part of the relationship. Sometimes he'd show up, unexpectedly, bring drinks, and spend hours bad-mouthing me. And Sabrina would laugh as if it were normal. I pretended not to care, but inside I was falling apart. I started to doubt myself, to think the problem was mine, that maybe I really was controlling, as he called it. But deep down, I knew something was wrong, that this guy didn't have her best interests at heart, nor mine. The most tense moment came one night when Raphael appeared upset. He said he needed to talk to Sabrina, and I, already tired, asked him to come back another day. He ignored me. He walked past me and went inside. The argument between them started quietly, but grew louder until I heard the sound of something breaking. When I got to the living room, he had pushed her against the wall. That was the breaking point. I ran him out of the house, screaming, my heart racing and my hands shaking. Seeing Sabrina scared, with her blank stare, destroyed me. I felt something inside me die right then, a confidence, a calm that I never fully recovered. After that, she tried to justify it. She said he was going through a hard time, that it wasn't his fault. I listened silently, but inside, I screamed. It was always like this. Raphael would do something serious. She'd make an excuse. I began to realize it wasn't just a toxic friendship. It was a kind of emotional dependence, almost an invisible captivity. And I was there, trapped with her, trying to help someone who didn't want to be helped. That's when I realized I was also getting sick, trying to save a relationship that was already unhealthy for either of us. That night, I slept on the couch. Or rather, I tried. I lay awake, thinking about every detail of the last year. I realized I was living in fear. Fear of losing Sabrina, fear of being the villain of the story, fear of confronting Raphael and being seen as the insecure one. But the truth is, I was exhausted. And it was there, in the middle of the night, that I decided I couldn't do it anymore. That if I wanted to escape that dynamic, I would need to reclaim my own voice, even if it meant losing it for a while. And that was the hardest decision of my life. The next day, I woke up feeling different. It wasn't strength. It was a kind of emptiness, as if I'd spent all my energy trying to fix something that didn't want to be fixed. Sabrina looked at me and asked if I was angry. I simply replied, I'm tired. And that was it. Tired of fighting for space, of walking on eggshells, of having to compete with my girlfriend's best friend. Tired of feeling like I was the one in the wrong for reacting to such absurdity. She tried to talk, said she was going to distance herself from Raphael for a while, but I already knew the script. It would last a week. Then he'd text, play the victim, and everything would go back to the same old story. I no longer believed in words, only in actions. And at that moment, the only thing I could do was protect myself. I started to distance myself. I stopped insisting on conversations. I stopped explaining myself, not out of pride, but out of survival. I wanted to regain my peace, to understand who I had become in this environment. I began to realize how much I had changed. I no longer laughed like before. I no longer made plans. I even avoided seeing friends so I wouldn't have to pretend everything was fine. I felt erased, living for a relationship that revolved around a third person. This hurt me deeply because I loved Sabrina, but I also knew that no love justifies losing yourself. And it was then that I realized that overcoming isn't about forgetting, it's about remembering without sinking again. One day, Raphael texted me. He said he wanted to work things out like men. I laughed nervously. That was exactly how he always handled everything. He portrayed himself as the mature, balanced one, the one who was just trying to help. I almost fell for it again, almost accepted the date. But something inside me froze. It was the first time I listened to my intuition without doubt. I didn't owe him anything. I had nothing to resolve. I blocked his number and felt a mixture of fear and relief. Fear of what was to come, but relief that I had finally done something that was for me. Sabrina was furious when she found out. She said I was overreacting, that I couldn't decide who she kept in her life. And I understood. It was her pain too. But for the first time, I didn't back down. I told her it wasn't about jealousy, it was about respect, about boundaries. I wanted a relationship of 2, not 3. She cried, called me insensitive, and I kept quiet. It hurt like hell. I wanted to hug her, comfort her, but I knew if I did, I'd go back to the same old cycle. So I let her go. And that was perhaps the hardest thing I've ever done. Loving someone and still letting go of her hand so she can see for herself is a pain indescribable. In the following weeks, the silence was heavy. I felt lost, but also free. The house seemed too big. Time passed slowly and I felt homesick. But this time, along with the homesickness came a strange peace. I could sleep without a start, without fear of an unexpected visitor, without being on high alert. I began to come back to myself. I started running again, cooking, listening to music, small things, but they reminded me of who I was before all this. And it was in this process that I understood. No one holds you back without your permission. Sometimes we give up control and don't even realize it. I had given it away, but now I was taking it back. The hardest part after the breakup wasn't the loneliness. It was dealing with the voices that lingered in my head. His words, the veiled accusations, the moments that made me doubt myself. I mentally replayed every scene, every fight, trying to understand where I'd gone wrong. And the answer was always the same. When I started accepting the unacceptable. When I stopped reacting so as not to appear problematic. It was painful to admit that I had lost myself. I, who had always been firm and secure, found myself fragile, drained of energy. But with this pain came a new clarity. I began to see how much I'd allowed myself to live in a game that was never fair. And somehow this made me want to change, to reclaim what was left of me. I remember one day I went for a run in the same park I used to go to with Sabrina. At first, it hurt. Every corner held a memory. Her laughter, her conversations, even the way she tied her hair. But after a while, that place began to take on a new meaning. I no longer saw the past. I saw my attempt to move on. I ran until I was breathless, as if I were shaking it out of my body. And in the end, sitting on the bench, sweaty and exhausted, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Pride in myself. Pride in not having gone back, in not having accepted crumbs disguised as love. People often think that the end of a relationship is always the point of pain. For me, it was the beginning of healing. When Sabrina finally walked away from Raphael, because he'd finally shown her true colors, in the most blatant way possible, she sought me out. She wanted to talk, apologize, explain that she now understood everything. I listened calmly. Part of me still loved her, but another part knew that what we'd experienced had already broken down. I didn't feel angry, just a kind of mature weariness, you know? The kind that comes when you've cried all you could cry. The conversation was long. She explained that Raphael had become aggressive, that she had lost friends because of him, that only then had she realized the extent of the manipulation. She said she felt ashamed, and I believed her. I'd felt that way too. The shame of having stayed so long in a place that hurts you is one of the worst. I didn't want to humiliate or rehash everything. I just said, I hope you get better. I really do. And that was it. Because I understood that forgiveness isn't always about getting back together. Sometimes it's about freeing the other person and yourself from the burden of guilt. After that conversation, I went home and cried. Not out of sadness, but out of relief. It was as if, finally, the cycle had closed. I realized that my breakthrough wasn't about beating Raphael or winning Sabrina back. It was about finding myself again. I'd spent so much time trying to prove I was a good guy, trying to be understood, that I'd forgotten to understand myself. That day, for the first time in a long time, I looked in the mirror and liked what I saw. Not because I was happy, but because I was whole. Over time, I began to understand that what I experienced with Raphael and Sabrina wasn't just a messy relationship. It was a wake-up call about what happens when we let someone push our limits in the name of love. I used to think love was about putting up with it, that patience and understanding would solve everything. Today, I see that love is also about knowing how to walk away when the other person doesn't want to change. I spent months thinking I was the one in the wrong, the jealous one, the controlling one. But now I realize what I wanted was respect. And it's scary to think how many people experience this and don't even realize it. You get used to small intrusions, small disrespects, and before you know it, you're completely overwhelmed. But you can leave, even if it hurts like hell. After everything was over, I started therapy. At first, I resisted, thinking I didn't need it. But it was there that I understood the extent of the damage. Manipulation doesn't just leave emotional scars, it messes with how you see yourself. I felt guilty for everything, even things that weren't my responsibility. My therapist helped me understand that I hadn't failed. I just trusted people too much, and they didn't know how to handle it. It was a shock to realize how much I blamed myself for other people's failures. And it was liberating to learn to put the blame where it belongs. Healing came slowly in small details. One day I realized I could hear Raphael's name without feeling angry. Another day I could look at an old photo of Sabrina and smile a little. These are small victories that seem trivial but mean so much. It's in these moments that you realize you're truly moving forward, that the pain has become a memory and the memory no longer hurts you. I still have scars, of course, but I've learned that scars aren't weakness, they're proof you survived. Today, I see love differently. I no longer want relationships that drain me, that make me walk over broken pieces to maintain peace. I want reciprocity. I want lightness. I want to be with someone who chooses me without having to prove anything. And above all, I want to continue choosing myself, because for a long time, I put myself aside to sustain something that only hurt me. Now I've learned that the greatest form of love is not losing yourself trying to be accepted. It seems simple, but it's the most precious lesson I've ever learned. Sometimes I get messages from friends saying they're going through something similar. People who have a Raphael in their lives, a friend, an ex, a relative, who manipulates, controls, and slowly destroys. And I always say the same thing: listen to the discomfort. It's the first sign that something is wrong. It took me a while to listen to mine, and I paid dearly for it. But today, if I can use what I experienced to help someone get out before they lose themselves, it's worth it, because no one deserves to live trapped in a story that only hurts. Today, looking back, I still feel a tightness in my chest when I remember what I went through. But it's not despair. It's recognition of what I overcame. I remember the sleepless nights, the fear, the anger, the helplessness. I remember feeling invisible, as if my emotions were worthless. But I also remember the strength I didn't even know I had. It was that day when I finally realized that Raphael wasn't just a bothersome presence, but a toxic influence that was pulling me off balance, that I began to break free. Clarity came painfully, but it came, and today it guides me. I learned that there's no shame in admitting you were manipulated, that there's no weakness in admitting you were trapped in a bad relationship. I spent months blaming myself, wondering if I'd failed, but I understood that the fault wasn't mine. The fault lay in letting someone take up space that wasn't theirs. Overcoming isn't about forgetting everything. It's about learning to set boundaries, to trust your own perception. And that's what changed my life. I became more attentive, more assertive, more capable of saying no before it's too late. Another important point was realizing that life goes on, that relationships come and go, but you remain. I continued loving Sabrina, but in a different way, with respect, without dependence. And I realized that true love doesn't suffocate, control, or manipulate. It is light, even in difficult times. And this realization gave me hope. Hope that it's possible to recover, even after living a whole year in a cycle of fear and manipulation. Hope that we don't have to accept less than we deserve. Today I can talk about it without crying. I can look back on my story and feel proud of having taken difficult actions, of having put myself first, of having learned to recognize the signs before it was too late. I know I still have scars, memories that hurt, but they no longer define me. They only remind me that I survived, that I am capable of facing people and situations that hurt me and coming out stronger, and this feeling is liberating. In the end, I want whoever reads this to understand one thing. Overcoming isn't magic. It's not forgetting or pretending nothing happened. It's facing, feeling, learning, and still moving forward. It's recognizing that you have value, that you don't need to submit to anyone, and that it's always possible to rebuild your life. I'm Gabriel. I'm 37 years old, and today I can breathe deeply without fear. Today I respect myself, and that makes all the difference. The pain was real, as was the learning, but the freedom that came after is greater than everything I lost.